Hello, hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the free-to-play review. So today's topic is going to be the latest iteration of the Deck of Fate, the Ethereal Deck of Fate. And as I always like to say, Decks of Fate are typically my least favorite event in the game because they are heavily RNG driven. However, I was actually wrong in my prediction when it comes to this particular deck of Fate. I had said in one of my previous videos that the historical precedent for decks of Fate is that the ones in the middle of Titan events typically aren't the ones that feature guaranteed champions alongside Titan event points. They're usually one or the other, but they've broken from precedent, which is always fair game when it comes to player and how they run their game. And so in this case, you can see we do have the guaranteed champion for Talena as well as 100 Titan event points. So you kind of get both if you're going for the champion regardless. In this case, the Deck of Fate is a combination of champion training and a soul rush, which is good because that means you can offset the amount of soulstones you'll have to pull by running the campaign and or using brews in the tavern, etc., leveling things up in the tavern. But as we'll see in a minute, the bulk of one's points is most certainly going to come from the soulstones and not from the champion training, unless you just spend the next 4 days grinding like absolute hell to make it happen. So we can take a look at the card or the events themselves. For anyone who doesn't know about Decks of Fate, there are 40 cards in every deck, and this is the breakdown of the rarity of the cards. So there's 17 commons, 14 rares, and 9 epics, and these are the various rewards. Majority of the cards, or maybe close to half of the cards, are going to be champion fragments. Some smaller subset are going to be the Titan event points, and then you have the rest of the rewards split amongst the rest of the nodes. And the main gimmick of Decks of Fate are that if you get 3 of a kind in a row, then you get to roll on these lovely respective tables. And unfortunately, this iteration of the Deck of Fate does not have the pinning feature, which means you are not guaranteed to get, in this case, it would have been 3 epic streaks in a row, or rather, you're just not guaranteed to get all 3 epic streaks because of the pinning feature where you could pin the epic streak and preserve it. So that is a bit unfortunate. So you're at the mercy of RNG as to whether or not you get any streak of any kind in this particular iteration. So at the very, very bottom, we can see here that we have the champion training aspect, which is a little bit lower than usual, which I guess makes sense to compensate for the fact that, again, majority of the points are going to come from the soulstone summoning aspect of it. And you can see here we have a pretty reduced but pretty standard amount of points per soulstones when it comes to each of the rarities and how many effective soulstones it will take to flip every card in the deck. And in fact, with that in mind, let's hop over to my spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to look at a copy of this for yourself. And so this is just a breakdown of various Decks of Fates in terms of the types of points that they can offer. So in this case, we do have the champion training aspect as well as the soulstone summoning aspect. So these are the values that you need to know in terms of if you wanted to do this entirely with soulstones, you would need 572 mortals for all 40 flips. Obviously, you need a subset of that if your goal is some less than all of the flips, 58 immortals or 12 eternals. And what I like to call the nerf replier here is 70%. And that's just a metric for comparing these values relative to the highest values we've ever seen when it comes to the amount of points you get for each of the soulstone types, that being, or 100% being 100, 1000, and 5000 respectively. So it definitely does make a difference to have it be 70% of the peak, but this is pretty much the standard nowadays for guaranteed champion, so it's not out of the ordinary anymore, I should say. And then when it comes to the champion training, the main thing to take away here is that, these are the amounts of points you'll get for making each tier of chicken and or 6-star champion. And then the upper row cumulative just means it's accounting for the fact that in order to make the higher tier chicken, you're going to have to add multiples of the lower tiers. So the important thing to note here is that if you wanted to do the entire deck with just champion training, you would basically have to make 4 6-star champions from scratch, which is a very, very tall order in 4 days, hence reiterating the fact that the bulk of the points that one would be getting is going to come from soulstones. So in my case, I am interested in getting the champion. I've talked about this before, but my high elves is a relatively weak faction when it comes to DPS overall, and I guess I can kind of just show you. But in terms of like attack-based champions, I don't really have like any of the really, really strong viable nukers. In fact, most of the faction isn't really strong viable nukers. I think Supreme Elhaine is okay, but she's not that great. Yannica is okay, but again, not great. There's no one who's kind of like crazy DPS, like a Georgid or a Hefrak, or something that's just like pure glass cannon type DPS. A lot of them are more so like utility debuffer DPS. Obviously, Solinar is kind of the exception, but he's a Void Legendary, who I don't have. And then, Thorion's great but mostly for PvE, and Alexander has always been a disappointment in terms of attack-based nukers. So yeah, I have some, but when it comes to PvE content, honestly, I'll either kind of take, a heavy, pure DPS to go alongside some supports to keep them alive. But Talena happens to be a nice mix of a little bit of CC with the mini Fabian ability here with the lockout here. It's only for one turn effectively, but sometimes that's all you need in terms of PvE content. You just buy yourself one turn away from, and then set yourself up for doing other things. And then obviously poisons are a good source of passive damage when you don't necessarily have active damage. It would be nicer, I must say, if I could pair her with Eleanorilla, who I don't have, but I think they'd be a really, really solid tandem for double poison plus the poison combustion. But anyways, I digress. So point being, I'm interested in getting the champion, so I'm definitely going to go out or try to go for her. And in my particular instance, what I'm going to be doing is basically champion training as much as possible over the next 3 days, and then on the last day, I'll see how much the remainder is in terms of points and do the rest of it via Soulstones, because in my case I do happen to have a decent stockpile of Soulstones. So I'll probably do, I don't know, at least 200 mortals, 150, 200, somewhere around there, some amount of the immortals, maybe a handful of the Eternals, because I do have the one here, but I also have 8 in terms of coins. I have 50 immortals in terms of coins, so I have a lot of stockpiles of Soulstones. And so again, this champion feels worth it to me, so it's worth it to go for the resources despite there not being any boosted rates or anything like that. But we're still going to try and min-max it, i.e. we're going to focus on champion training, and then we'll come back in a few days and do all of the summons that we're going to do for the Deck of Fate, as well as flip all the cards in the deck. The good news is for me with this strategy in relative to the Titan event, that does mean that I don't have to skip the Deck of Fate, so I can bank those 100 points and skip some other events. Because initially my default setting when it comes to Titan events, if there is a Deck of Fate, is to skip the Deck of Fate, because again, typically, historically, they haven't been the guaranteed champion. They're usually something really, really bad, like glyphs or a really niche gear set or something like that. But in this case, the guaranteed champion is a good return on the values for once. So I will be doing the Deck of Fate, which means I get to skip something else. For those who recall, in the summon rush that we just had this past weekend, I did skip the upper node of 150 points, so I'm already 150 points in the hole, and so the other 100 would have been the Deck of Fate, and then I would have had to have done everything else thus far. But this changes things, so now that we are going to be doing the Deck of Fate, that means I'll have to, I get to skip rather, the 100 points from some other events, or some other combination of the events. So in terms of a formal recommendation for you guys, I think it kind of just depends what your goals are, and of course what resources you have at your disposal. If you have enough Soulstones or close to enough Soulstones, then I do and you want the champion, of course, then I do recommend trying to get her, because I do think she's going to be useful for a lot of people. Obviously Fabian is better, especially in terms of PvP, but I think she could be useful as, a second lockout for a second team, thinking like Tag Team Arena, or thinking in Live Arena Thoughts. If they pick Fabian, you can pick her as a backup. Because I think, I'm myself included, most people don't have multiple lockout champions to kind of pick and choose from on their accounts. And so if you have the opportunity to guarantee yourself a second one or a backup option relative to Fabian, I think that could be a good, worthwhile investment for a majority of the player base who then, again, don't have I get to pick between Yumiko, Warlord, Crixie, and Fabian, depending upon the fight. I know also most people are usually itching to pull whatever, resource, Soulstones or shards on the first day. But once again, I do recommend that you follow my strategy if you want to min-max it and focus on champion training, get as many points as you can from that, just to minimize the amount of Soulstones you'll have to use to get all the cards in the deck if that's your goal. But of course, you can play however you'd like to play. So yeah, that's going to do it for the free-to-play review of the Ethereal Deck of Fate. Once again, I do think this is a relatively good value. The champion is useful, I think, for a majority of the player base. The cost is relatively high just in terms of Soulstones, but of course you can offset it with champion training as much as one can do over the next 4 days, so that does help offset some of the cost. And I guess as an added bonus, you will also be getting some Titan event points along the way if that is helpful to your goals relative to the Titan event. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below on the Ethereal Deck of Fate. Are you going for the champion? Are you going for all 40 flips? Do you care about the Titan event and other things? Let me know all of that and more in the comment section down below. If you are more interested in the Soulstone summoning aspect of this Deck of Fate, at least relative to my account, then just stay tuned. That video will be coming in the next few days or so, I guess on the last day of the event. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit the like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well, if and only if you're enjoying the content overall on this channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.